We saw how energy moves through an ecosystem. Primary producers get energy from the sun or chemicals, and when consumers eat them, about 10% of the energy the producer started out with is passed on to the consumer. As these energy transfers take place, matter is also being transferred. When a snake eats a mouse, it's consuming not only the energy that it contains, but the materials as well. Some of these materials the snake will use in its own body, and others are disposed of as waste. Several types of materials are recycled in the biosphere, since matter cannot be created or destroyed. We'll take a look at how water, carbon, and nitrogen cycle through the biosphere. Matter can move from one place to another using 4 different types of processes. Biological processes are ones that involve living things. When animals eat or drink, they take material into their bodies. They also release materials into the biosphere when they breathe out or eliminate waste. Geological processes are ones that involve rocks. Volcanoes erupting bring materials that were once underground to the surface. Weathering breaks down rocks, and the materials they're made from are returned to the soil or the benthic zone. The third type of process is called chemical and physical. These include the movement of water and lightning strikes. Finally, humans affect the way materials move through the biosphere. We create pollution, clear land, and add nutrients to the soil by fertilizing our farmlands. This slide is how you should take notes on the nutrient cycles. Create 3 charts, one for each cycle. Then create 4 columns like you see here. Each arrow on the picture represents how matter moves in the cycle. You'll find a description of the movements in white boxes, and for the most part, the to and from are either written in gray boxes or you can infer it from the picture. Finally, the arrows are color-coded to represent what type of process is occurring. Humans are made up of nearly 60% water, so water is really important. It makes up our blood, the inside of our cells, and many of our body processes can only happen if water is present. If your throat or lungs are too dry, you cough and it may be more difficult to breathe. Water helps our body temperature stay constant, and when waste products are dissolved in water, they're less harmful because they're not so concentrated. We lose water when we breathe, sweat, and go to the bathroom, so we have to replace it by drinking and eating. Fruits and vegetables have a lot of water in them. 3 basic processes move water through the biosphere: evaporation, precipitation, and transpiration. The oceans contain about 95% of all the water on Earth. Freshwater sources like lakes, ponds, streams only account for 5% of the Earth's water. It evaporates and condenses, or sticks to particles in the air to form clouds. When clouds cannot hold any more water, it falls as precipitation. Precipitation that soaks into the ground is called groundwater. Plants then take up this water through their roots. Just like we breathe out some water, plants release water into the atmosphere as well. This process is called transpiration. Precipitation might also fall into bodies of water. From there, it can then be evaporated back up into the atmosphere, beginning the cycle again. Carbon is the main component of all living things. It's in the protein in our hair and muscles. The membranes around your cells are made from fat, which have lots of carbon. It's also the main component of molecules we use for energy, sugar. It makes up the skeletons and shells of many living things. Animals breathe out carbon dioxide, which then becomes part of the air, dissolved in water. Plants can then use this carbon dioxide. It's also an important ingredient in photosynthesis, as plants make their own food. Living things that die still contain carbon. If they get buried underground long enough, the pressure that builds up can turn them into fossil fuels, like oil and natural gas. But carbon is not just found in living things. It's also found in rocks and makes up part of our atmosphere. The carbon in our atmosphere comes from 2 different sources: animals breathing and humans burning fossil fuel or other carbon compounds. Finally, the nitrogen cycle is important because nitrogen is often a limiting nutrient for life. Nitrogen is one component of our DNA and is used to make protein. DNA is required to grow because each new cell needs a new set of instructions, so without the instructions, there can be no new cells. Because nitrogen is a limiting nutrient, it's often the main component of fertilizer. Factories take nitrogen from the atmosphere and convert it into a form of nitrogen that plants can use. Fertilizer is then applied to farmland, and it may seep into groundwater or get washed into rivers and streams when it rains. This runoff, high in nitrogen, can cause lots of algae to grow near the base of a river in the ocean, like off the coast of Louisiana. Since this allows so much algae to grow, the algae use up all of the nutrients and oxygen in that part of the ocean, causing a dead zone where nothing else can live. Another source of nitrogen is the atmosphere. It makes up almost 80% of our atmosphere. So what's going on here? How can nitrogen be a limiting nutrient if it's so abundant in the atmosphere? Well, nitrogen can take different forms based on what it forms chemical bonds with. The nitrogen found in the atmosphere is not the form most living organisms are able to use. Some bacteria that live in the soil or on the roots of plants are able to convert nitrogen from the atmosphere into nitrogen that other living things can use. They act like tiny factories producing that fertilizer. This process of converting nitrogen in the atmosphere into nitrogen that most living things can use is called nitrogen fixation. Animals can then use this nitrogen, and they get rid of the nitrogen in two different ways. Their waste contains nitrogen, and also when they die, the process of decomposition releases nitrogen. A different type of bacteria also lives in the soil. They're able to convert nitrogen plants and animals use back into nitrogen found in the atmosphere. This process is called denitrification.